let us spend some more time to understand what HTTP or the Hypertext Transfer Protocol actually is.
This video is brought to you by OppiePie's Academy.
So now, whenever we are looking at HTTP, it essentially is a way to get information from a server or to establish communication between two different points. So now, whenever you look at an HTTP or a Hypertext Transfer Protocol, then essentially you can notice that it is always a request and response based process. Okay, so over here you have one particular server which makes a request onto a different machine, and then the other machine caters some response back to this particular machine. So unless you make a request, you will not get a response. And this is the fundamental working principle of HTTP. So now in HTTP there are a lot of different types of requests, but the main two different types of requests which are used are GET and POST request. Okay, so a GET request is used when you just want to get some data from the server. A POST request is used when you want to give some data back to the server. And whenever you want to specify some parameters inside these particular requests, then the parameters are bundled inside the main URL and the entire thing is given back as a GET request. So now over here, whenever we get any type of response from an HTTP server, it essentially has the following characteristics or the following objects. The first one is a status code, and that actually tells you about how successful you were from getting the data from the server. So there is a famous error called as 404, which means that the page was not found. So that is a line which will be sent onto this particular status line. Okay, so after that we have the response header, and the response header contains a lot of different properties which the website wants your computer to be accustomed to. So something like the cookies or the date of the request or the time of the request, followed by what request you have done, and if you have some specific objects established as do not track me or something of that sort, and all of these things are given back to your computer from the response header. And then after the response header you have a blank line, and then after this blank line you have an optional message body. So this is essentially how a request is made using HTTP to any server, and this is how you get a response. So now let's look at a real life example where we'll be giving in a GET request to Google, and let's see what response do we get. So to do this, we are using an app called as Postman. This app is open source and it lets you make requests very easily. So over here we have a GET request, and this GET request is basically being made to google.com. So over here you can also see the different types of HTTP requests. So we have GET, POST, PUT, patch, delete, copy, head, options, link, unlink, purge, and all of that. So over here let's make a GET request to google.com. So over here this is the response which we have received. Okay, and this may not look very pretty right now, but if you look at the preview section, then this is essentially how it looks. Over here you also have the Google logo, which is not being displayed right now, but essentially this is how the entire thing looks, and this is the raw data which we get from Google. So this is the only thing which we get, and your browser reconstructs the entire web page based on this particular response. So over here, if you look at the response, you first of all have a lot of different header files, then you have the style, and then you have the HTML followed by some JavaScript over here. Okay, and over here things can also be a lot complicated, as in the unbox section of this particular course where we'll be designing a decentralized Dropbox clone. We are going to be creating a JavaScript file, and onto that JavaScript file we are then going to convert it onto a different type of file which is around 200,000 lines long. So similarly, we'll be getting a lot of different content, especially JavaScript content, on this particular response tag. And over here, if you look at the response, you can essentially see that there are a lot of different aspects to it. So if we look at the headers of this particular response, or the body or the pre-request tag, then you can see that we are getting a lot of different things, and this is essentially the point which I wanted to get across about HTTP, which is that it is very good while doing network communication because it has all of these things built in, like the status line, then the response header, and all of these things can together make the web experience a little bit better. And yes, that is pretty much it about HTTP. It is used to communicate data in between two or more nodes, and while communicating that data, you have a certain protocol which is followed, and the rules of that particular protocol are mentioned over here, which has a status line, then a response header which contains some important information about that particular data piece which you are getting back. Then we have a blank line, and then we have the optional message body. And the reason the message body is optional, see, if you look at an HTTP request, then the whole point of making the request is to get some data back. Then why is this particular thing optional? Well, that is because sometimes you just want to check the health of the server. And what I mean by the health of the server is basically you want to check if the server is online or not. And whenever you want to do this, you just put a GET request where you don't get any message out of it, but you only get a response header which tells you that the server is alive and it is giving you back at least relevant information or relevant data packets. So yes, that is pretty much it about HTTP. And now that we have established a strong foundation of what HTTP actually is, so now let's focus on what are the problems we are currently facing with HTTP, and what are some future problems which we can also face with HTTP, and how we can integrate IPFS and we can create strong and robust web applications by using decentralization.